All right, here we are with lesson 2 from chapter 3. And today we're going to talk about distributive property. So you can read the definitions there and what that really means. Copy that down. All right, but let's draw a diagram of how we should know distributive property. So when we're distributing a variable that's outside the parentheses or a number that's outside the parentheses to whatever is inside, we're using multiplication to do that. I always like to draw arrows, all right, above the problem so that way I can see what I'm actually distributing. So I'll do A times B. And I'm adding A times C. Okay, what if there's subtraction on the inside? Doesn't matter. Okay, now I'm going to do A times B, but I'm going to subtract A times C as the second term. Let's check that out in action. So you can read the problem here with the candy shop and the group of 3 friends. What the distributive property allows us to do is to sort of perform these operations a little bit faster. So 3 friends, they each bought the same thing. So we'd be distributing the number 3. Okay, so 3 lollipops, P, right? So 3, and then we have P plus 2 candy bracelets, B, and 3 gummy worms, which would be G. Okay, so if we wrote that expression, it would look like this. But if we distributed that 3 to each of those terms, we'd find out the total number of each of the candies that were purchased, right? So we'd end up with 3 lollipops. We would have had 6 candy bracelets. And then we would have had 9 gummy worms. Okay, and if you went to the Candy Kitchen in Ocean City Boardwalk, that probably would have cost you $42. Let's take a look at some examples together. So first one here, again, I always like drawing those arrows. Okay, so I'm going to multiply 8 by both of these terms. So 8 times 2g is 16g. 8 times negative 9, remember that minus is a negative, is negative 72. Then I need to examine, are these two, okay, like terms? The answer is no. So what I have, 16g minus 72, is my final answer. What happens if I'm distributing a negative number? No different. Okay, now it's the minus 5 that gets distributed to both terms. Okay, so when I do that, I end up getting, what is that, negative 65. Okay, D. And then I have negative 5 times 11 is negative 55. All right, again, I examine these two and notice that they're not like terms. So that is my final answer, negative 65D minus 55. And my last problem here has lots of negatives in it, so I got to be really careful with my signs. Negative 4 times negative 1m and negative 4 times negative 8. All right, remember negative times negative makes positive, only in math class. So 4m and m plus 32. They are not like terms, so I leave them as they are. All right, this next problem here just is matching. Okay, so you want to match which of these expressions, okay, comes up with the simplified answer. So again, trying to get you to pay attention to signs. Okay, so in this first one here, everything's positive, which means it has to correspond to the one where everything is positive. All right, in the second one, we have a negative constant, right, in that first expression that's in the parentheses, which means our constant in the final answer is also going to be negative. Okay, in the third one, the number we're distributing is negative, and it's being distributed to 2 positive numbers, which means both of our answers are going to be negative. And then finally, we have a negative being distributed, but it's getting distributed to a negative, which means our second one becomes positive. And again, you can perform each of those distributed properties to see which ones they match up to. All right, if you turn the page, we're going to do a couple of examples together, but then I also have a couple here blacked out that I want you to try on your own. All right, so the first one here, everybody's scared of fractions. All right, let's take a look at a distributive property of the fraction. We're going to take that 1/2, and we're going to multiply by both terms in the parentheses. So 1/2 times 6m gives me 3m, and then 1/2 times 10 gives me plus 5. Okay, so I end up with 3m plus 5. There's no like terms, so that's my best answer. Now, the next one here is going to give us a different look. Okay, we see this 2 is what's being distributed to the parentheses. Well, what happens to that 3/4 x? Well, nothing at first, right? It comes along for the ride. I distribute my 2, and I get plus 18. And I get minus 2 times 1/4 is 1/2 x. Now I do need to examine this, right? Do I have like terms? And I do. All right, I have 3/4 positive, okay, and negative 1/2. So when I combine those two, I get positive 1/4 x. The 18 does not have a like term, so it stays the same. So 1/4 x plus 18 is my best answer. Okay, next up, I have another distributive property problem here, but this one's a little tricky, right? I have this minus 0.25. Remember that that's the same as adding a negative, which means I'm actually distributing negative 0.25 to both of these terms. Well, you ask what happens to the 13. 13 comes down to the next step. Okay, so 13 plus negative 0.25 times 4 gives me negative 1g. Negative 0.25 times 6, but that's going to be 6/4, which ends up being 1.5. So it'll be a minus 1.5 if you prefer decimals. I need to look at this and decide if I have like terms, and the answer is yes. I have a 13 and a minus 1.5. Those are both constants. All right, the coefficient here for g stays the same because there's no like terms for g. So minus 1g. And then 13 and negative 1.5 gives me positive 11.5. So negative 1g plus 11.5. All right, at this time, I'd like you to pause the video. I want you to try problems 5, 6, 8, and 10. Okay, and then when you're finished with those, just come back to the video and you can check out to see what your answers are. All right, so hopefully you worked through those and you were able to see what they came up with. All right, you can check out the work, copy it down if you need to, make corrections to yours if you need to. All right, and if you still don't understand, that's okay. We can talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to move on here to number 12. It talks about area of a rectangle. We did perimeter yesterday, okay, which was the distance around the outside of the rectangle. Now we're talking about area, all right, which is what makes up the inside of the rectangle, and that's multiplication. Area equals length times width. So we're actually going to use multiplication here. All right, so based on what we have 20 times 4 2/5 x minus 5. So again, they throw those fractions in there at you, but remember you can use a calculator, which I know most of you do. Okay, so if the fraction worries you, just use your calculator, check to make sure your answer is correct. Okay, so what do we get there? Let's see, that's 445. All depends here if you want to use decimals or fractions. All right, if I was trying to do this by hand, which I am because I don't have my calculator with me right now, I'm changing the 4 2/5 to 22/5. So I'm taking 22/5 and I'm multiplying that by 20. So the 5 and the 20 reduce to 4, so it's 22 times 4, which gives me 88. So I would have 88x. All right, and then I would have 20 times negative 5, gives me minus 100. All right, so my area would be 88x minus 100. Hopefully I didn't goof that up. And the last one here just asks you to find out which of these simplifies to negative 10x plus 20. All right, Journey, Kai, and Luis each did a problem. And which of those folks' problems simplifies to negative 10x plus 20? All right, so the idea here would be to simplify each of these your own. So negative 10x, all right, 2 times 10 is 20. So it looks like Journey did a good job. All right, Kai ends up with a positive 10x minus 20. All right, so Kai had their symbols flipped, so no go for them. And then finally, Luis, 5 times negative 2 is negative 10x, and 5 times 4 is 20. So it looks like Luis got the answer correct. All right. I'd like you to work on the homework assignment that goes with that section.